Hello again, welcome back to Around the Archives in Conversation. We've bought a splitter, haven't we, Lisa?
We have, hello.
So Lisa is here too.
I am.
Hello, Lisa.
Hello.
Like I haven't seen you.
Yes.
And here's Martin.
Hello.
And here's Paul.
Hello.
So we're having a foursome on the sofa, aren't we?
Yeah.
Is that a virtual force?
We've got Dealey here as well, so technically it's a five.
I can hear Dealey.
Oh dear Lord.
Oh.
Well, today I think we'd like to talk about ephemera.
Ephemera.
That's a good word, isn't it? Because Martin, the other day I saw you post a load of pictures of your target books, or your list of your target
Oh
books.
well, yes.
So
I've done that before, of course. But
how did you collect target books, and what was the process?
You see, I'm very, very, very old indeed. So I've actually just been. What's the word I'm looking for? I've been excavating in our very, very packed attic, and there was a load of stuff that was in front of this bookshelf, which I put the bookshelf together about a year ago, and put all my target books on it, and then promptly piled a load of stuff in front of it, so I couldn't see it again. But so I've taken it out, and I can see it. It's sat next to me even as we speak, so I'm gazing upon it lovingly, because these are the books that have been next to me for many a year. Strangely enough, they used to be on the very, very top shelf. We had bookshelves in the living room that were double stacked with books, because we have so many books in this tiny house. And for a long time they were the back row at the very top there, and then we had a leak, so I put them all. I wrapped them all in plastic in a very Twin Peaksy way, and so they were up there for years. Then we redecorated, took all these shelves out and everything like that, so they all got put in a box for about 5 years. But now they are in their glorious glory, sitting on these shelves in the order in which I bought them, which I know annoys some people.
But how do you know what order you bought them in?
Well, you see,
there's got to be a method, hasn't there?
There is method in my madness, yeah. I mean, I was maybe I wasn't a strange child. I like to think I wasn't a strange child. I think I was a very sensible child, but some people may disagree with me. But strangely enough, when I got, I think the first three, which were the Daleks, the Auton Invasion, and the Crusaders. They were bought for me. I don't remember buying them. I just remember having them. So I think this was the kind of, and I would have been 9 in 1973 when they came out. The first three came out. So about 10 years old when they started doing the releases, and people kept buying me them. I remember very much the Genesis of the Daleks. The copy I have of that was bought for me on a birthday. I know it was a birthday because in my little record of the dates I bought them, there's my birthday in all its glory, which I don't tell many people, but nevertheless it is there. So, and that would have been about book 20, but I got to about book 12 and I started writing down the day I got it, which is, I don't know, that seemed sensible to me. The first list, in fact, funnily enough, when I was digging around a few months ago, I actually found the first versions of these lists and the second versions of these lists before I finally put this book together and rewrote it. I was terribly anal. But I pretty much bought them from the day they were. I think my mum worked in Smith's in the children's book department when I was about 10. So it may well have been all her fault. This whole thing may be all her fault. And once I got to about a dozen of them, I started writing down when I got them, and I was basically buying them as they came out until, when was it? Was it Battlefield was the last one, wasn't it? which would have been about 1989, 1990.
Yeah, the tail end of the range, I'm a bit fuzzy on the dates, but yeah, it's early 90s, I think, possibly.
Tell you what, I have the booklet here. I can tell you when I bought Battlefield.
Okay, let's test your system then.
Well, I say I can tell you. Battlefield was bought on the 18th of July 1991. There we go.
Ah, that sounds about right. Yes.
Yeah. So and that was, I think, the last of the K9 companies there as well next to it. So maybe that came out slightly later. But yeah. So I would have been 18 years of buying 150 books, and of course people have only just managed to complete the range, sort of, by the Douglas Adams and the two Dalek releases, which I think are going to get sort of Target style releases, aren't they, this year? The two new Dalek ones.
Oh, possibly.
They are, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got the hardback ones. I won't be buying them again. In the
Not great in style, or just you're not that kind of completist.
They leave a little to be desired in terms of some of the storylines and some of the names.
Oh, interesting.
That,
I've not actually read them.
Chosen, but
I've got the hardbacks, like you say. I've not actually got round to reading them yet. They're sort of in the great big stack of books and somewhere down the list. So I've not actually read them. I had the hardbacks, but since they came out, I think the audio version of one of them is on the shelf somewhere. So, I've suddenly lost the time I used to listen to audio. So. Yeah.
But what about you, Paul? I've never really asked you about Target books. Were you an avid collector, or?
Well, I'll give you.
Were they off your radar?
Well, I'll give you. I'll try and tell you this as quickly as possible, because there's lots of this I can think of. I was thinking about this when I knew we were going to be talking about this. I think my first memories of them are borrowing copies from the mobile library that came through our village, and I don't even know if I was old enough to read them, or maybe, because I know I was a Doctor Who fan from about the age of 6. So, I remember having lots of them on the floor in the living room, and my mum saying, some of them have to go back this time. And I don't know that I'd read any of them. I was just looking at the covers and knew they were important artefacts. And then later I did buy them, and I remember, particularly when the Five Doctors novelisation came out before the Five Doctors. I don't remember how much of it I read, or whether I did read it all before it came out. But I did have pretty much a complete set. But about a year ago, I sort of decided they were sitting in my parents' house, and I'd also been buying one or two for my iPhone digitally. And I was aware that Nick had at one point had quite a complete collection, but somewhere along the way he'd let a lot of them go and then regretted it. So as he'd been doing so much for me, digitising my footage, and because I didn't really read or ever look at my collection, I just kind of said, take your pick of what you need to fill your gap, because they're so expensive a lot of time, or some of them are very easy to come by, or have even been re-released, and some of them are harder to get hold of. So I still want to keep what I've got left, but I don't really mind. I'm glad that they've gone to a good home and completed Nick's collection. Yeah. So
you're not that kind of completist.
I was at one point, but
yeah.
But I never look at those ones, and I quite like the digital ones. I read The Invasion of the Dinosaurs the other day on my phone, and I really enjoyed doing it that way. So
because for me, I think it's the artwork. There's so much nostalgia sort of wrapped up in the artwork. I was only saying the other day that people my age, because we didn't have video, we didn't have access to video, our impression of certainly the first and second actors, Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell, was from the books. That was how we knew them. And in many ways, if you actually look at the images on the cover of the Hartnell books, they don't really resemble him in that way. He's a very stern figure, or a very it's just not the sort of bone structure, if you like. It doesn't look like the chap we've come to know since on video, if you see what I mean.
I'm pretty sure when I first read them, I still hadn't seen, sort of, because it was before the Five Faces of Doctor Who. I'm sure I was reading them before then, so I wouldn't have seen the first three Doctors. Or
You see, my memory of the Five Doctors and that sort of era is that I was a student at that age. I was probably far too grown up to be back. I would sneak into town, and there was a bookshop that happened to always stock them on the day they came out. And so I remember surreptitiously reading the Five Doctors in my rooms at college.
But the Five Faces repeat series, that must have been the first time that they'd repeated Hartnell or Troughton's.
Oh yes, absolutely, yes.
A long time. Well, in poetry.
Well, apart from Three Doctors, which we kind of saw him in action in that, but or in inaction, I suppose. But yeah, again, I mean, it always amazes me because I now realise that the new series, if you were running in consecutive timelines, they'd be up to something like the Key to Time season, if you see what I mean, and therefore Eccleston to some children today is as mysterious and far away and long ago as Hartnell was to us. Although our generation, we never even imagined we'd ever see him.
Yeah.
But what about you, Lisa? What's your relationship with Target books?
I didn't actually start buying them until 1989, 1990, after Doctor Who finished. Might have been slightly before then. But when I was a child, my mum used to read them to me, a chapter every night. So we used to get them out of the library, and she'd read me a chapter or two every night. And then I had a shelf above my bed, and she'd put it on the shelf and go downstairs. And I'd wait till I heard that she was downstairs, and I'd take a peek at what happened next. And read ahead.
But what books stick in your head from that period?
The one that sticks in my head most is Horror of Fang Rock, because of the cover.
Yeah.
Because of the cover with Tom with a rope around his neck and that hat that she doesn't actually even wear in the story.
Well, he puts it on for about 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that's my memory of it. And also, my other memory of it, and I don't know if I ever actually read it at the time, is the Hand of Fear cover, wondering why Neris Hughes was on it. Because it didn't look like Sarah to me, it looked like Neris Hughes.
Oh, everyone's a critic.
I remember though having the Doctor Who monster book, and Martin,
Yes.
you probably had it as well, and the back cover.
Oh, with all of it,
a load of
gorgeous,
of
isn't
covers.
it?
Yeah, and I remember just staring at that for what seemed like hours on end.
Yeah.
Because there was a poster inside of the front cover art, and I always
Yes.
wished there was a poster of the back cover art as
Yeah.
well.
That
So
might
I didn't
have been-
have all the books at that point. I didn't
No.
have Doomsday Weapon. It took me years to track down Doomsday Weapon, for example.
But I mean, were you? I mean, is that an age thing? Because I think maybe the fact that they were on the back of the monster book might have had something to do with why I wanted to collect them and write down when I got them, if you see what I mean. But you see, I never ever thought of any of them as rare because I just bought them when they came out, if you see what I mean. So it's kind of odd to me that because there are people who came to it later who had to track down these things and try and find them, and that must have been if you're a completist, that must have been an astonishingly difficult process.
Well, what annoyed me, I did get the Doomsday Weapon, but it was the second cover. That's the thing. I wanted the first cover that was on the monster book.
Oh, the big claws. Yes.
Yeah, with the terrible claws. Yes.
It's a lovely painting, that actually. Isn't it?
Yeah. But it's also weird that you associate colours with those stories now. Like the Abominable Snowman as a story, I always think of as light blue because that
of
was the spine cover. Yeah. Almost as that, because it was the same colour as salt and vinegar crisps were in those days when they were light blue. So it's just weird the association that a colour can make with art.
I always
story.
loved the Cybermen cover just because of that black spine and that. I just thought the black one really used to stick out. It's interesting, Lisa, that you were saying about Horror of Fang Rock because my memory of Horror of Fang Rock is just because that's the one that got the condensation damage when I left them on the windowsill overnight. So it still has the water damage at the bottom,
I think I remember Moonbase and Spearhead and the Silurians, or the Cave Monsters, of course it was called, wasn't it? Those ones that stick in my head, partly because did they all have illustrations? Did Moonbase have illustrations? I can't remember, but certainly.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
I think it was particularly those sort of. I think a lot of my liking for Troughton and Pertwee came from the novelisations before I'd even seen them. But,
well, I think Chris Achilles did the illustrations for Day of the Daleks, but the illustrations for Cybermen are by Alan Willow, and they must be based on set photographs, although there's that full page one of them looking at the scanner right at the beginning, and yeah, I don't know what reference they used for that, but I suspect he was drawing for the annuals at that time,
I mean, Paul and Lisa and Martin, I have to ask, do you go back to these books and reread them? Because occasionally, if I'm having a bath, I sort of I need to have something in my hand when I'm in the bath, and I will often sort of go in the tub with the Sea Devils or something like that, just because I can skim through it in like sort of 20 minutes or something like that. I don't need anything too big. So.
My sister got water on the Three Doctors as it were, when she was having a bath. So there's an outtake quote for you. No, my sister got that damp, so she used to borrow them and read them in the bath. So I tend to be a bit more protective. Oddly enough, since they've been doing the audio readings on CD. I've tended to buy those really, but I've been a little bit more selective. I tend to want, for some reason, I want the complete Hartnell on audio at some point. That's just a thing in my head. So the Hartnell ones I will order as a matter of course, but I haven't really ordered many of the later ones,
But when it comes to things beyond books, I think it's true that when I was a fan, there wasn't much you could get beyond books.
No.
Because there was the Genesis of the Daleks LP, but I didn't get it until some years later on cassette. There was the 2 Doctor Who music releases.
Yes.
And Martin, you mentioned the poster magazines you could get from the exhibitions. But,
yes.
But what other bits and bobs did you have in your collection that you either loved or hated?
It's very strange because it was mostly books. I mean, even until the magazine, the Doctor Who Weekly started in, was it 78, 79?
79. Yeah.
I mean, apart from the odd sort of scrap of Radio Times jiggery-pokery and the odd, what would you call it, the stuff you would sort of cut out from the newspapers, trying to think, ephemera, which is one of the reasons I started doing scrapbooks, because you start to accumulate this kind of stuff when you're that sort of age. There wasn't a great deal. You went to the exhibition, I think the Dennis Fisher toys were around the mid-70s, and obviously prior to that you had all the things like Sugar Smacks badges and what were the other Sugar Smacks thing that you could get? Didn't they have masks or something on the back of the packet?
I don't know. It's a bit.
I mean, there was things like the Weetabix. There was the Weetabix.
I did have the Weetabix bits and bobs.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So there were promotional things, But really, apart from books, and I mean, okay, yeah, I know there are whole books about the toys you could get. They didn't really make it to me. I had a Dalek bubble bath one Christmas, the black and yellow one. But those sort of toys, just maybe it's being up north, lad. But there wasn't those sort of things never got through to us. I was terribly jealous because a friend of mine had the remains of it. It had obviously broken years earlier, of one of those Dennis Fisher Dalek model toys. But his was silver and gold, so it must have been a very early one. Because I know they came out in red and blue and things later. But the 60s one, the one they used on the production line in...
is it Power of the Daleks?
Yeah, he had this. He must have had it from his big brother, and it was just sort of broken in a toy box. So this mate of mine, whose house I used to go round to, had this, and I was always terribly jealous of that, because literally it was the only Doctor Who toy prior to the sort of Tom Baker years that I've ever seen, really.
What about you, Paul? You did mention one item
Yeah.
before we started recording. I'd love to hear about.
Well, the other thing before I get to that, I was thinking about is the pescatons. No one talks about the pescatons anymore. That was sort of, along with Genesis, that was the only other audio thing which you could sort of get.
I did have that, but I was almost scared of playing it because it was something about the music and the atmosphere of it that I played it 2 or 3 times, but it didn't often make its way into the record player because I was a bit frightened of it.
I feel like I didn't own it. I think that was another one that was always being borrowed by me from the public library. But the things that I actually had, I think it was more sort of early 80s type merchandise. Like we had this TARDIS Playhouse. And that would have been sometime around 82, 83, because my brother was around and he was born in 82. But the cover of it was 3 little kids dressed up as Tegan, Nyssa and the Doctor. No Adric. I don't think there was Adric on there. I definitely even had the back of it even had like a perspex, which I guess was the monitor screen. So I had that. I also had a talking canine and a talking Dalek. Again, this was sort of early to mid 80s. I felt like it was slightly more ahead of some of the things that I think when it came to the Dapple stuff later in the 80s, it was more cheaply produced, or not quite as advanced as that, but I always remember that the talking canine and talking Dalek would have been quite good. I did have.
Does that mean you could get a Tegan outfit?
I don't know. They didn't come with the outfits. But there might have been. I'm not sure.
Well, is it giving you ideas, Martin?
No, not at all. I was just kind of noting that they didn't make an Adric outfit, and that was probably actually more suited.
Yeah,
kind of.
Because technically, if it was going to be Tegan and Nyssa, it should have been a different. Because it was definitely their first season, their season 19 costumes.
Because it's kind of iconic, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the Doctor outfits are always quite iconic, but there's not until that era is there a kind of outfit associated with the companions, as it were.
I did have some Dapple figures, but a friend of mine who was very keen on Cybermen, who wasn't, I wouldn't say he was a massive Doctor Who fan. He was more of a Cyberman fan. He bought loads of Cybermen, and then for years into the 90s. When I was like already by that point in my 20s, Chris, I think he probably got past wanting to keep them, and I'd get like a parcel of about 3 Cybermen for like as a birthday present. I was like, not in the boxes or anything. Just I'm like,
but that must have been presumably that's the impact of Earthshock, isn't it? Because I mean they hadn't been on television for 8 years before.
Yeah, he is the right age because he's a little bit younger than me, so he would have been about 9-ish or whatever when the Cybermen came back. So
powerful stuff, this telly.
Because rewatching some of your Sutton Parks you've sort of put up in the last sort of year or so, I did note your white and gold Dapple Dalek. It makes an appearance in your student digs.
Yes, I had quite a few of those.
Copyright alert. The Nation Estate are after you.
I was going to say Terry Nation will be after you for Sutton Park. Illegal miniature Daleks.
You can't help it if a Dalek lives in your house with you. I mean, it just lived in my house. Daleks have lives as well. They're not all horrible.
But Lisa, what?
So, Lisa, would you have bought the Tegan outfit if it had been available?
What
appeals to you, Lisa?
I'm not sure I'd bought a Tegan outfit. I think I'd rather have a Doctor outfit, to be honest.
Yeah.
Quite
I
right,
could have
too.
dressed up as the Doctor instead of just...
But did you have Dapple stuff?
Not until very late on.
Because we've got a little Sylvester over there, haven't we? Where did that come from?
I think he's fallen down somewhere. That came from Forbidden Planet.
All right.
Been on the gin again.
Yeah. Oh no, it might not have been Forbidden Planet. It might have been John Fitton actually.
All right.
In London.
Yeah.
So that was.
Well, tell us about your trips to Forbidden Planet then, because you used to go there with Paul sometimes, did you? Or with our group generally.
I don't think we didn't go to Forbidden Planet as much as HMV in Oxford Street. That was a popular place to go. We occasionally went to Forbidden Planet, but it was more, sort of HMV and looking at all the sort of videos and things.
Wow.
But just going back briefly to books, though, I didn't mention the fact that I had, we've still got it upstairs, I had the omnibus editions of Mind of Evil and I think it's Claws of Axos, the Star ones.
Yeah.
They've got a silver cover. And the Mind of Evil one I particularly remember because my mum used to have to go for a lot of hospital appointments. So my dad would take her, and obviously I would have to go along because I wasn't old enough to be left at home on my own. And I would always take that book with me to read while we waited. So that's my memory of reading that book and sitting in a sort of hospital waiting room waiting for my mum to be seen and so we could go back home.
Okay.
So that's what I remember when I look at that book.
There's a warmth, isn't there, to the memories that come with these books. I mean, it always fascinates me, that picture of Stephen Moffat reading whichever one he's reading in that photograph, and I think no one ever took my picture taking reading a Doctor Who book, and yet I must have had one in my hand most of the time at that age.
Yeah, did you ever take them to school? Because I did.
Me?
Yeah. Well, any of you? Yeah.
I got them out of the library at school, and I got told by a boy at school, and I'd not been, this is when I first started senior school, so I was 11, and I got a book out of my bag, a Doctor Who book, which I think I might have got from the public library at that point, but I did look in the school library and there were Doctor Who books there, and when I went back for a reunion we went and had a look and there were still Doctor Who books there, whether they were the same Doctor Who books or not I don't know. But I got told by this boy that I couldn't like Doctor Who because I quote, "You're a girl," and girls don't like Doctor Who. And I think I just gave him a disdainful look and carried on reading the book.
The funny thing I was going to say, linking into what we were saying about how important Earthshot was, I think that the Five Doctors was very important in my little group of friends in the village I lived in, because I was pretty much the only boy, and then there were lots of tomboys. And when we were still young, we were only 10 or something when Five Doctors came out, and none of the girls wanted to be companions. Having seen the Five Doctors, everybody wanted to be. It was which Doctor you going to be. So nobody was playing Tegan or Nyssa. Everyone was playing. Got to pick a doctor. So all the stories were multi-doctor stories.
So it's always been terribly progressive in that sense, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, you don't want to be sort of pigeonholed, and I think that's the interesting thing. We get pigeonholed in life by other people. Like say that boy talking to you. It's just bog off. Quite frankly, if I want to read them, this is a thing I enjoy. I'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
But beyond the worlds of Doctor Who. And that was actually a book you could get, wasn't it? The Worlds of Doctor Who. I also remember in my collection having LPs of Faulty Towers soundtracks. Okay. So, what other TV items did you have in your collection beyond Doctor Who? Can you think?
Well, I know from my point of view, my sister bought the New Goodies LP, which I was very fond of. Which I still have a copy of on the shelf.
Is that the world? I don't have
a vinyl player at all, but I do still have a few of my sister's LPs, and that's one of the ones we have. Well, my mum and my granddad really bought things like Eric and Ernie. There's an Eric and Ernie LP on there, on the shelf there. So I think it was definitely a cultural thing. There's the Tony Hancock. There was the re-recordings of Blood Donor and Radio Ham that were on vinyl. So I think these things sort of actually charted in as far as these things do. They were popular things. People really sort of wanted to re-experience their Morecambe and Wise or what have you in those days.
Because home video doesn't really take off till like the early to mid 1980s, does it? So if you're talking late 70s, if you wanted to re-experience a TV show, records were actually quite a good place to go. Because I certainly remember those two Faulty Towers ones. I had at least one Monty Python LP.
Yes.
And Lisa, I think we both had the two Muppet Show albums as well.
I don't know if I had both of them. I definitely had one.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I had both. But yeah, I remember listening to Pigs in Space.
Yeah.
on it, and still being scared of, because I was quite scared of Statler and Waldorf when I was a child.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at the cover thinking, God, they're very scary looking, because they were so old, I think, and grumpy.
They were old and angry.
Yes. Yeah.
But Paul, what?
Sorry, I just say I think there's an association with that age as well. I think sometimes, because sometimes these things were re-recorded, weren't they, for in studios rather than the actual TV soundtrack. And I think sometimes your memory of it is the one you heard on the LP rather than that's. So when you're watching it on television, it seems a bit wrong sometimes.
Well, for me, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, my go-to recording for years were the LP remakes, because they're not the same as the radio versions.
No,
they're total re-recordings. So when I listen to especially that first season on the radio version, it just feels a bit sort of sparse and empty because it doesn't have all the effects on it that I'm so used to hearing from the later LPs. It's very odd that, to me that's the definitive version, and for a lot of people, of course, it won't be.
They're about to be re-released.
Ooh.
On CD, I believe.
I'd be interested in that because they are different, and they're different enough to be worth investigating.
I think they may be coming out more or less about the time of the anniversary of Adam's death. I'm not sure, but I think they are due to be released fairly soon, actually. Although obviously things have changed and things aren't getting pressed and factories aren't running. So, but I think they were supposed to be out this year.
But Paul, what other TV-related items can you think of beyond Doctor Who, or were you a Doctor Who only household when it came to books and toys?
Certainly connected to TV. I remember being bought. I don't think it was one of their normal albums, but I had a Wombles compilation, which had, I think it was themed around the Christmas song they did, but it wasn't just that. It was Martin Greatest Hits, and I really, really loved that. And this was just last year. No, well, actually, yes, I do still cover the Wombles, but no, I remember another boy in the village who was a couple of years older lending me another Wombles album, and because he must have been sort of, I don't know quite what age we're talking about here, under 10, but I don't quite know when. And he gave me this album, and I think it was on the understanding, I thought, that he was giving me this album because he must have been pushing his teens. He wouldn't really have wanted the Wombles album. And I remember, though, he came back for it, and I think that's the day I can remember crying more than I'd ever cried in my whole life, was that he was taking the Wombles album away. And it wasn't like you could just walk into a shop and buy it. I didn't know where he got it from, or and so I was very keen on the Wombles songs, and I still listen to them to this day. And I've told Mike Batt so as well. I told Mike Batt that I know the lyrics to Minuetto Allegretto and Super Womble, and I often that's my party trick, is that I can just parrot them out. And I'm not very good at remembering lyrics and things generally. And he was bemused but impressed.
Well, they are kind of locked in your brain, aren't they? Those songs that you hear at that sort of age. I mean, they lock in a way. It's like ad jingles from the same kind of era. You can remember every word of particular advertising jingles, and they can come out at the most bizarre moments. But you can't remember something you saw yesterday.
Well, I've always said with my own poetry that it's more inspired by song lyrics than it is by other poets, and it's like Minuetto Allegretto. Back in 1780, when Bulgaria was allowed, they were minuetting in the morning, in the evening they were minuetting mad. Mr. Minuetting Mozart was lord of the town, and forgetting to be minuetting was letting the other minuetters down. It's lovely. It's just lovely lyrics. It just bounces off itself.
Yeah.
I think you deserve a round of applause for that,
absolutely. You will live to be old.
I'll do Super Womble later.
What's the Madame Shirley?
I mean, sometimes I get bits of the Super Womble one wrong, but but it has some very good lines in it about it's another good one.
Remember, you're a Womble.
Yeah.
But Martin,
yeah.
a year or two ago on YouTube, I remember you putting up a video of going through a box of bits and pieces, and finding some
wish I could remember that. No?
corgi toys and things
Oh,
like
yes.
that. So what did you have in that department?
Well, I mean, corgi toys was interesting. I mean, Dinky and Corgi and indeed Matchbox. They were all kind of, if you think about it, all the tie-ins from that era were really to do with the Anderson series. You know, again, you do sort of feel there should have been a Bessie. There never was a Bessie, as far as I'm aware, in that era. It was kind of missing, but because I used to have the catalogues, I still have the catalogue somewhere, so I have everything. So you would get a Joe 90 car or a UFO, what's it called, Interceptor, or
yes, yeah.
I mean, there's a beautiful few years ago, because I always admired it and they'd never done it. I was bought one of those. I can't remember who did the die-cast ones, but I've got a gorgeous Skydiver on a shelf somewhere, because I love submarines. So Skydiver was just a gorgeous die-cast model, and that was a few years ago. But if I could have had that when I was 10, I would have been absolutely overjoyed. But I mean, there were the Eagles, the Eagle transporters, and obviously, and weirdly, the Starship Enterprise with the strangely completely distorted Starship Enterprise and the strange pellets that came out of the front.
Oh, the photon torpedoes. Yes,
I had something like that, but I think it was years later that I realised it was actually from a TV programme. I somehow got hold of something like one of those sorts of toys, just totally. I don't remember it being branded or anything, and it was only later when I sort of watched UFO.
Some random spaceship.
Yeah, I just thought it was a random spaceship. I mean, what you're like when you play games with toys anyway. If one's from one series, you might have like Doctor Who fighting the $6 Million Man, or something. All these crossovers that happen in the world of toys. In your own games of toys. When we used to play Doctor Who, I used to cross over with the Triffids, because I'd seen Day of the Triffids, or some of it, because it was far too scary. I got scared after episode 1. But in all of my Doctor Who games around that time, it was always Doctor Who versus the Triffids.
And that should have happened.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, you've got a crossover story like that, haven't you?
About playing Doctor Who. Yes, we would play, because my nieces and nephews are only sort of 5 or 6 up to 10 years younger than me, so we would all play together, and we used to play at being Doctor Who, and I was always the Doctor because I was bossy. And then my two nieces would be Nissa and Tegan, and we tried to get my nephew to be Adric, but he was only about 2 at this point, and he was absolutely loved the Fraggles. And he wouldn't be Adric, he would be a Fraggle. So we used to just leave him to sit under a chair somewhere and be a Fraggle while we played Doctor Who.
On the whole, I think I agree with him.
Playing Doctor Who when my brother came along, because I think I've probably been playing Doctor Who at school and playing Doctor Who with the tomboys in the village. And those stories would have had some proper plot. There would have been a cliffhanger. We always recap the cliffhanger and continued on. And there was a while I did keep my stories. I had a book and I wrote down the plots of the stories that we did. But then when my brother came along, he didn't really want to do plots. He just wanted to do fighting. So I think it sort of fizzled out really, because you couldn't do the sort of more nuanced stories that I wanted to do. Just fighting.
But what about annuals? Were you a receiver of a Doctor Who annual on a regular basis? Anyone?
I don't remember. I don't remember ever getting a Doctor Who annual.
Oh, right.
Not at that time. Later on, when I could buy them for myself, I bought all the yearbooks and so we've got the odd annual that we sourced from a charity shop. Different places, but I never got them at the time.
I did have some, and if I saw them at jumble sales, I'd pick them up. But didn't they fizzle out around the time of Colin Baker? There was no Sylvester McCoy annuals, were there? I don't think.
No, there weren't. There's that one with many Colin Bakers in sort of different shapes. I mean, we've done a couple of spoof covers based on the later annuals for around the archives, but I think basically at the time of the hiatus rather did for World Distributors or whatever they were called, World Publishing. because they were all done in Manchester. I mean, I knew a couple of the artists weirdly, you know, but I got my well again. It had absolutely horrified collectors, but I have a Patrick Troughton one which I cut up for my scrapbook.
I cut up a lot of Doctor Who magazines to try and make an episode guide, because they had, was it the early 80s or late 70s, they had like an episode guide each month, and I thought it would be really good if I cut them up and stuck them into a scrapbook, but of course that never happened. I cut them all up and then they got forgotten somewhere.
It was so difficult that before the magazine came on to get visual information, you know, visual reference stuff you could put in, apart from actual cuttings from the paper, you know, news cuttings. You couldn't find photographs, you know. So if you wanted to sort of put, you know, a cover together or something, it was actually very difficult to do. You know, photocopies of target book covers were about as sophisticated as it got back in those days. Or I mean, I can you know, the certainly when I was doing the scrapbooks, things like the Thai food tea boxes, you know, just cutting out the bits off because you bought so many Thai food teas to get the set. So you had spare copies of that sort of picture of the row of characters, you know, or the logo. But until that came along, or until the Weetabix figures, there wasn't that much material out there, apart from, of course, the classic Radio Times special, which thankfully I didn't cut up,
because classic Doctor Who sort of missed that era of sticker books. I think there was a sticker book. I remember having a sticker book in the early days of the new series, when it first came back, but certainly by the late 80s, sticker books, whether it be football or Neighbours or whatever you're interested in, it was Neighbours for me. I had a Neighbours sticker book, but Doctor Who wasn't really popular enough in the late 80s to warrant that sort of treatment.
And bubblegum cards. I mean, I don't know. I never particularly took to bubblegum, but I seem to have most of a set of Planet of the Apes bubblegum cards somewhere, and most of a couple of Star Wars sets. So they were sort of deemed bubblegum worthy. Yeah. But then again, I mean, Thai food, you know, they must have sold a lot of tea because of the Doctor Who cards they did. And I imagine that Weetabix wouldn't have done it twice if the first one hadn't been, you know, gloriously successful. You know, and of course the Sugar Smacks with John Pertwee. So, you know, and wasn't there a Doctor Who chocolate bar?
Oh, I think there's one. I vaguely remember seeing a picture with Pertwee's face on.
Yeah,
if you just give me a few minutes,
yeah, we'll talk amongst ourselves.
Well, yes, that's the idea. I have actually got the Great British Tuck Shop book sitting next to me, so I can possibly leaf through and find it.
Well, I mean, there's I believe there's an infinite number of chocolate bars from that era that nobody ever remembers. I don't think anybody remembers Super Mousse. I don't think anybody remembers the Pink Panther bar, which was a strawberry flavoured thing, which was, well, to my mind, gorgeous. But then again, I was 9.
But did you have? I was going to say, saying about chocolate. Did you have the Peter Davison Easter egg?
I never had that. I was a bit old for that, I think.
With that infamous bit of. Oh, I found it. Hang on a moment. Doctor Who, 1971 and 1973.
Right.
I've got here. Well, it's got to be later than 73. Doctor Who Milk Chocolate, Doctor Who Cartoon Collection, picture 15. That's got John Pertwee on it, and what appears to be Tom Baker and Bessie. So these are from, depending on which logo you believe, either Nestles or Nestle. And it was
Nestles, mate. Yeah, no, it's got to be Nestles.
Because wasn't it Doctor Who Fights Master Plan Q or something like that? There was some picture card sequence like that. Oh, and look, on the next page, Super Moose. There you go. Oh, Larry the Lamb. I've got Larry the Lamb and Noddy. Galaxy.
I'm just having fond memories of the multiple scented fries bar now. The fries.
Oh yeah. You apparently you can get those, but they're only in Poundland.
Rhubarb dairy milk chocolate. I think there's a Wombles one as well, which would please
Or make me
Paul,
cry,
so-
one or the other.
Womble's chocolate, it makes you
Right,
cry.
it probably would
I
do.
never saw that.
Oh, here we are, Wombles with Wellington and was it Cairngorm the McWomble? Yeah. There's Mr. Men, there's Rupert, and there's Pink Panther, which was strawberry flavoured and horrible.
Right. And of course, there was, on the other side of the coin, there was the ice lollies, weren't there? So there was the Dalek Death Ray, you know. So.
Did you ever actually like that? Because I didn't.
The Dalek well, I like mint. So, and if you like mint, you know, chocolate mint, it was fine. You know, I mean, there were much more horrible ice lollies than that. You know, I would put it this way: I bought more than one, so I mustn't have disliked them completely.
Well, there's a load of Jerry Anderson adverts for the Zoom and the Fab, aren't there?
Right.
There's Joe 90 adverts and
there's tie-ins,
Thunderbirds
isn't it? You know, I
adverts.
mean, the thing is,
Yeah.
I think the Sky Ray existed, and then they did the Patrick Troughton Sky Ray, didn't they? Well, not really Patrick Troughton. Hide your face. Advert. But the Sky Ray lolly itself had been around for a while. They just found a way of tying it. So I presume that would have been when they did collectible cards or something, which you can't really imagine inside an ice lolly. You get this soggy bit of cardboard, really. But I suppose it worked. Maybe they put them in little plastic bags inside. I don't know how that worked.
But bringing it up to the modern day, I think it's true that Lisa especially is guilty of trawling eBay and Amazon a lot every month when we decide on something to do on Round the Archives. So what are some of the strangest things you've sourced in recent years? It's a lot of annuals and books, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the Sweeney annuals are fairly odd, and the Van der Valk one. I mean, the Sweeney especially, the fact they did an annual for a programme that was not aimed at children or teenagers is a little bit odd, especially since it's got sort of weird games in it as well.
Yeah. I do like the Van der Valk chase game where you can chase round on a canal or something, isn't it? Yeah. We should actually do a video one day where we play
I feel
that
you
game.
should, and you must wear brown leather jackets to do it,
and drink beer, yeah.
and get Sylvester McCoy's old Colin Baker wig.
But Paul, you joined us in getting hold of the Animal Crackers book, didn't you?
Yes.
When you did that article, and I think it's just helpful to see these programmes in better context than just watching the DVD. I often think it gives you a better perspective.
I certainly think that because I know, like I say, I knew people at World who did a lot of the annuals, and I think it was just whatever license they had, and whether or not they actually pretty much used the same stories and the same games throughout the entire range, and whether you actually look at your Van der Valk book and open it and it's got the same game as a John Pertwee annual, I don't know, but it's always a possibility.
Because we've got some Catweasel books,
We have.
annuals rather. We've got Dad's Army one.
Yes.
Trying to think what else we've got. It's a bit strange. Z cars we've got, and some of those are quite strange, and even the TV comic ones as well.
Yes, they're a little odd.
Yeah.
I've got novelisations but these were bought back at Comic Mart back in the early 90s, so they were 60s books probably published at the time, but I've got novelisations for things like The Invaders, Get Smart. There was a whole range of Dark Shadows novelisations that went into the early 70s. There's quite a lot of those. I must have about half a dozen of those, maybe more, but I think there were 20-25 of those. So I've got a few sort of weird novelisations of even things like, as you know, I like Sons and Daughters, and there's some of the soaps. I think there was some prison novelisations. There were some Neighbours novelisations, Sons and Daughters. So things you would never probably.
Well, it was again pre-video. I mean, the novelisation of a film or a TV series, that was the way you experienced it, wasn't it? That was, or re-experienced it. You know, I've also just remembered, because you mentioned the Sweeney, weren't there board games for the Sweeney as well? Have you been collecting board games?
Board games is something we don't dip our toe into. We have to draw the line in terms of space somewhere. But I did have War of the Daleks.
Yeah,
yeah, I did have that. Yeah,
which was probably the only way you could get a Dalek toy at that age as well.
Though for a while I kept getting emails from eBay trying to sell me the Coldix board game, because I'd look for Coldix books on eBay, And they repeatedly said to me, "Are you interested in this? I don't want the Colditz ball game. It's too complicated."
It's also, I mean, when you think back to that time, I mean, I had my Action Man, as it were, and they when Colditz was on television, you could get blooming a whole load of Gestapo outfits and God knows what for your Action Man. You could dress him up as a Nazi as much as you liked. You know, they had astonishing range of Nazi toys. When you think about it now, it's outrageous. You really can't. But it was just another aspect of the war, I suppose. I don't know whether the thing that now causes it to be more problematical was still people were still bothered by it, or whether it was just people didn't think of it in the same way. It's very odd.
Well, Tim Worthington's just retweeted today a clip of you, Lisa, talking about the Jaws game.
Yes.
On when we appeared on Looks Unfamiliar a couple of years ago, and isn't there an Alien game or something like that?
I think he said there was. Yeah.
And it's just the weird things that are pitched at children from films that aren't child-based at all.
No.
You know, just to make a bit of money, I guess.
It's always interesting as well that the gaming industry, you know, there used to be wasn't there a pinball Doctor Who game?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was quite often tie-ins to things that were massively inappropriate for the sort of the gaming and gambling industry.
Because you used to like the Addams Family pinball.
Oh yeah,
you?
when we used to go to the Isle of Wight, I think it was in Shanklin somewhere.
Yeah, it's in a sort of.
I'm quite a fan of pinball games.
Yeah.
And there's an Addams Family game, and at one point you get the ball in a certain position, and Thing's hand comes out and grabs the ball and puts it away, and you get a soundbite, "Thank you, Thing," or something like that.
Lend a hand, Thing.
That's it, Thing. Lend a hand. Yeah.
Well, I suppose they are less gambly, aren't they? I suppose.
Yeah.
I did have that Doctor Who game released around the time that Davison was the Doctor. I'm not sure how many versions there were, but I had it for the BBC B. I can't remember what it was called, but it had a picture of Davison on the front, and I always remember I had trouble loading bits of it, or you'd have to. It was never that popular.
It must have been a nightmare, you know, sitting in a room trying to come up with a game that was actually associated with Van der Valk or the Sweeney. You know, basically, a lot of them I know were variations on Ludo, weren't they? Generally, you know. But I think there's like, shut it, go back 3 places.
I think there's an On the Buses game that's a bit like that. And it sounds so odd, I'm almost tempted in my madder moments just to play the On the Buses board game.
Because I did have the Battle for the Universe game, the Doctor Who one, which had pictures that just looked nothing like any of the people they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
You'd be looking at Romana going, "Who's that man?" That's not Romana, that's a man. That's a man in a dress. It's, you know,
the delights of licensing is marvellous, isn't it?
Because isn't there that Top Trumps game with the Ogrons and the Sea Devils?
Oh, and it's the wrong way round.
The wrong way round.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think Gruntley the Ogron got confused over there, didn't he? Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, it's the wonderful lack of quality control you used to get, and I don't think you get that as much these days.
Well, again, it's interesting that they had in the annuals. They usually had the Doctor's face. They could, the actor would have approved that they could use their image, but then Sarah would look like, I don't know, Caroline Munro, or Harry would look like some strange porn star. Porn star Harry, I think, did a thing on Twitter a couple of years ago.
Because there is a couple of panels in one of the annuals, and it's one of the late 70s ones, where the sort of the Doctor and Romana, or whoever it's meant to be, I forget, seem to have landed on Moonbase Alpha.
Yes,
because you've got the whole set. You've got the whole set and the lights, those funny white sort of curvy lights that they had on the desks.
And Barbara Bain. Yeah,
and even as a kid, I remember thinking, "Well, hang on, this feels familiar." I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but I knew there was something wrong there.
There's a comic strip in one of those annuals from the mid-70s, which Leela walks around in a skirt and t-shirt, but the likeness has been taken from a very unpleasant scene in A Clockwork Orange.
Because Martin, you'd know about this more than us. Aren't there later, sort of towards the tail end of TV comic, when they reprint Pertwee?
Oh, they draw over his head with Tom Baker.
Yeah,
yes,
and Pertwee's suddenly got Tom Baker's head. And,
yes.
Yeah, it's very, very strange.
Yeah.
Thinking, we can get away with this.
I don't know if you've ever visited the John Pertwee recipe book canon thread on Gallifrey Base at all.
No.
There's a lot of those images in there. Tom Faker, I think he's called. And not twee or something. But yes, I mean, I did think. I mean, for a long time, you did think that you could get away with it for just basically colouring in John Pertwee's hair. But no, they did actually draw over. They did get an artist to actually draw a new face over the whole thing. But there were the same plots being recast. I mean, TV comic was struggling for money in its later days, and that's what they did.
But yeah, there's also these really odd books, like, as you say, the John Pertwee. There is a John Pertwee recipe book. There is, I think, Peter Davison's book of alien monsters.
I have
had
that.
the dinosaurs one.
Yeah,
I have the dinosaurs one because I like dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are just like collections of old science fiction stories, aren't they? That they've put a picture of Peter Davison on in the hope that it sells some copies.
Oh, I had to.
Because we've got.
Sorry.
So, just going to say, we've got John Pertwee's Book of Horror stories. Which is basically just... I don't think he picked the stories, he just put his name to it.
Just a lot of motorbikes.
I had the Viewmaster for Full Circle and Castrovalva.
Okay.
I remember... They did look... Yeah, they did look quite special back in the day.
They must have done proper 3D photography for those.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So they must have had a cameraman on set, sort of taking photographs.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, what would you say though, if you had to rescue some items from your collection these days, what would you grab first if you had to rescue something?
For me, it would be the original recording of State of Decay.
Yeah, why is that?
Because it's such a part of my childhood, and I know it's on the. I think it's on the season 18 box set.
Yeah. Because
the re-release is not right to me because it's not Tom Baker. He's not doing the voices. It's not got the music bits on it.
Yeah.
And I listened to that tape so many times.
Yeah.
It was a very treasured thing when I was sort of 8 or 9.
Yeah.
So.
For me, it's the Doctor Who monster book. The original version, not the 80s reprint.
Yeah.
And it is partly because of that back cover.
Mm-hmm.
This is Doctor Who, and that this is stuff you haven't even sort of discovered yet. And it was the mystery of the books that I hadn't read, and that's what I really liked.
Yeah.
But what about you, Martin? What would you rescue?
Well, you mean apart from all that Dwaz stuff? No, I if I had a fire, I should get a fire safe. But I think I would want to rescue my Radio Times 10th anniversary special. I think that is kind of. I think that is where I turned the corner. I remembered sort of when they announced it was coming out. I think I dashed to the newsagent that night. Of course, it hadn't come out today. It was coming out soon, but of course, when you're 10, you don't really get that. But the 10th anniversary special, strangely enough, I do have 2 copies of that for various reasons, and that's a very treasured piece. Also, for different reasons, the making of, because I bought. I got the Tom Baker copy of the making of, but a friend of mine who I used to get sent to another family's house just before Christmas for various reasons when I was a child, and they had a copy of the 1972 Piccolo version, which they showed me, and I was absolutely blown away by that, because obviously it's got completely different photographs in it. It has all the different. It's a different book in many ways, and and that for years I remembered it, but I couldn't find a copy anywhere. And eventually, about 10 years ago, I paid really seriously over the odds for a copy on eBay, and it is, it's a wonderful object. And having spent so many years chasing it, I'd be very loath to lose it.
So what about you, Paul? What's your essential item?
Well, I don't think I've got much in my flat here. Probably the oldest stuff I have is back at my parents', so I almost forget what I've got. I think I would maybe just grab all the Blu-ray sets and DVDs and things that I've spent so much money on, just for sort of practical reasons. I don't think I've got anything here that's rare enough that stands out really. And you sort of often forget what I have still got back at my parents until I open a drawer and find some Doctor Who stuff mixed up with some plans for an episode of Sutton Park from 1993 or something. I've still got like nobody else will remember this, but except for Andrew. But I used to put an episode number. I used to have to get a bit of white paper, a marker pen, and then you point the camera at it, and it would sort of do a colour picture of it. That was how you do the numbers. So sometimes when I'm going through odd stuff with my parents, I find bits of white paper with 325 on it or whatever. So I have an archive of my own stuff, which is probably more valuable to me than Doctor Who's
Paul,
stuff.
those are essential pieces of paper.
Yeah.
I agree with you there. Save those definitely.
When the definitive volume gets written.
Yeah, I've still got a few of the Sutton Park puppets around as well. They probably need rescuing, so it's probably my own archive that I would be looking to rescue more than my Doctor Who archive. But
I was just wondering, Paul, you know this show Repair Shop that's on, where you can take treasured items? I wonder if you should turn up with some of the old Sutton Park cast members if they're in a bit of a state and see if they can be restored.
I think the ones that I saw last, about 5-10 years ago, they did a photo shoot for one of my Mass of Commons books, and they didn't look much different. So I think they've done quite well, a lot of them. But I'm sure there will be.
They've weathered better than us.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be some that need a bit of help, but particularly ones that were doctored by Lee and had new costumes put around the original.
The Museum of Sutton Park. There you go. One day it'll happen.
Well, do you remember? Do you remember that we had there was Crispin the dinosaur, and Lee did a Julian Clary sort of headdress and everything around the original puppet, which was just quite a basic puppet.
Yeah, because it was a bit of a sort of Time Lordy collar, wasn't it? It was all glittery.
Yeah.
Yes, and he became even more flamboyant. I seem to remember. Yeah. But there we go. Right.
I think it's interesting though, because I don't know about you. Do you think you have anything that's particularly rare? I don't think I've got anything that's a rare collectible. But that's the thing, is you don't think anything you have is because you've got it. If you see what I mean. But do you think you've got a particularly rare collectible in your
I think the only
household?
Vaguely rare thing is the last Troughton annual. And
Right.
I remember getting that at Wimborne Market, and I paid 30 quid for it years ago, and it's in pretty good nick.
Right.
And sometimes it's the quality that sort of means how much these things cost. But but you can find that. You can find that online if you search. I think I've got very little that's actually unique. I don't know about you, Lisa.
No, probably not.
The thing is, with these things that were produced en masse, you just presume that there's still loads of dapple figures lying around in people's attics or sitting on people's bookshelves, and maybe there were less than you think, but we need to do a roll call.
I suppose it's as much as anything though, isn't it? It's the fact that the fact that you forget is because you were just there and you bought them. I mean, things like those poster magazines I was talking about, from the 70s. You think oh well, they must be 10 a penny, but of course that's what 35-40 years ago. And so maybe there aren't as many of them about as you think you are, and all the people who have them have lovingly sort of kept them and sort of nurtured them. But generally speaking, if you were a fan today, you would probably not find one very easily.
It makes you wonder what stuff would be considered rare from the new version of the show.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, I wonder if certain shows don't sort of attract collectors as much, because when I went back, we were talking about this earlier, I went back to my parents, found a load of these Neighbours collector's cards that I had, and I was really kind of chuffed. They were really good condition. And I mentioned it on a neighbours group that I go in, and nobody really. I put some photos of them. Nobody really responded at all. So I don't think they
didn't remember they
existed.
existed.
Nobody cared. I don't think they were really interested at all. Because I think there are certain fans of that show that are very keen on the early stuff, and then there are fans who like it now. So, and they're not. If they didn't see it 30 years ago, they're not that interested. Who's that sort of thing?
Do you think that modern viewers have not got the sense of TV history? You know, if you're a Coronation Street fan, you want to watch Coronation Street today. You're not interested in Ina Sharp.
I think that's I think there's certainly a lot of people who would feel that way. Yeah.
Sorry, Andrew, I spoke over you then.
No, I was just going to say, is it almost that there's like the classic Who, new Who? Sometimes there's a divide there. Is it almost the same with Neighbours?
Could well be. I mean, it's been 35 years of history of it, in the same way as with Coronation Street. You know, as you say, TV historians are interested in the early Coronation Street, but today's watchers, viewers aren't probably not. You know, perhaps if a character from the 80s comes back for some episodes, they might be like, "Oh, yeah, I remember her when I was a kid" or something. But I mean, some shows don't really look at their past very much. I mean, of late, Neighbours has been very backward looking in a nice way. They had a whole plot line last year where all of Paul Robinson's ex-wives showed up for a whole big storyline, which was, to me, it was like the Five Doctors of Neighbours. It was great to have all these old characters coming back, and they do that a lot on Neighbours these days.
There was that nice episode of Father Brown, wasn't there, when all three of the detectives turned up?
Oh yes, that's right. Yes.
Towards the end of last season.
That's right, yeah. I love it when things like that happen. Probably because of my Doctor Who. I mean, it would have been great if they'd have done an Avengers back in the '60s, where Emma and Kathy and Tara are all together.
Yeah. Do you think then that we are unusual in that sense, that maybe when we will get excited about a DVD release of something from 30, 40 years ago? Do you think we're not? We're not the norm. Most people actually don't. They wouldn't particularly be interested if suddenly someone released the 1985 The Best of Neighbours or something.
I think we're quite a small group, but then there's quite a lot of us in this. There's still quite a lot of us in this group. So, amongst our friends and ourselves, it doesn't feel weird, but it does when you talk to people at work who kind of like chuckle when you mention you've bought this thing that's from 40 years ago.
And yet there are people with football programs going back to 1950 something. So I mean,
that's always been a thing where it's okay to be a football fan. There's nothing geeky. People don't call football fans or sports fans geeks, but they're probably the biggest geeks, even more so than we are.
They even have the outfit.
Yes. They travel,
but not.
They also travel all the way across the country just to follow their team. Where we don't have to do that for Doctor Who, except for conventions.
Right, well there we are, boys and girls. Or boys and girl.
I was going to say, before we go, you said about collectibles. I've just remembered that I think we've got more or less the complete run of the Doctor Who comics from the 90s upstairs, with all the reprints of the old strips. Yeah. So that's probably worth.
I think they're in the bed mostly, aren't they?
Yeah, they're under the bed.
Not in the bed.
They're in a drawer under the bed.
Drawer, yeah.
Like people who sleep on pound notes, you just sleep on your Doctor Who magazine.
Well, there's an image for you. Okay. Well,
on that bombshell.
I think we're leaving conversation again, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.